4 years now. Playing these games meant battling DOSBox configurations, hunting down disk images, and praying the installer wouldn't crash. Most of them are now on GOG or Steam, running out of the box on modern systems with widescreen support and no fuss. The timing matters because these are games worth actually playing. Not archaeology projects, not nostalgia trips, but genuinely strong RPGs that never found the audience they deserved. Siege of Avalon was released in 6 downloadable chapters starting in 2000, with the first chapter free, an early experiment in episodic PC distribution that predated the modern model by years. Digital Tome, a Houston studio making their first and only game, built an isometric RPG structured explicitly as an interactive novel, with journal entries, third-person narration, and a world dense enough with dialogue and lore that finishing it genuinely feels like finishing a book. The Anthology Edition, collecting all 6 chapters, hit Steam in 2021 in a version patch for modern compatibility. The character system has no rigid class restrictions beyond a starting specialization that affects which quests become available. A squire can pursue knighthood through a specific quest line. A scout can join the rangers. The opening chapter's decisions persist. NPCs you fail to help in Chapter 1 may be unavailable or dead in later chapters, and the reactivity is more granular than most contemporary RPGs attempted. The Siege setting, with its confined politics and desperate morale, gives every quest a context. This isn't adventuring for loot, it's doing what needs doing for a community that can't survive many more losses. The combat is simpler than the story deserves, and some of the later chapters show development time running out. The storytelling tightens while the dungeon design thins. The original planned trilogy was never finished. Digital Tome disbanded after poor sales. What exists is a first act with genuine ambition, built by people who clearly love the genre, now running on modern hardware through the Steam Anthology release. Veil of Darkness drops a cargo pilot into a sealed-off valley in 1930s Romania and gives him a prophecy, a crashed plane, and the knowledge that the vampire lord running the valley has been waiting for him specifically. The premise is pure gothic pulp. Karen murdered his brothers, inherited control of the valley, used his powers to seal it from the outside world, and has been feeding on the locals ever since. The pilot is the prophesied destroyer. Karen knows. The locals know. Everybody is waiting to see what happens. Event Horizon Software built it as an adventure RPG hybrid in the quest for glory tradition. Exploration, inventory-based puzzle solving, keyword dialogue with NPCs who each carry their own story, and combat that functions as puzzle design rather than challenge. Most enemies can only be defeated with specific items, which means surviving a night encounter requires understanding what you're facing. The status ailment system, aging, curses, weakening, poison, applies ongoing pressure that connects the horror tone to the mechanics. The valley map is non-linear, and the game trusts you to piece together the prophecy structure through conversation rather than quest markers. The 2023 GOG and Steam re-release runs through DOSBox emulation with no setup required. The combat is clunky by design intent or by age. It's genuinely hard to tell. And the final section escalates difficulty in ways that feel cheap. But the atmosphere is exceptional. The NPC cast is better characterized than most contemporary CRPGs managed. And Veil of Darkness is the kind of game that makes you understand why people still talk about this era with affection. Geneforge 1 Mutagen is the 2021 remake of the original 2001 Spiderweb software RPG, rebuilt from the ground up with updated visuals, rebalanced systems, and restored content that the original released without. Jeff Vogel wrote and built the original Geneforge series across 5 games between 2001 and 2010, and the Mutagen remake represents the version the first game was always trying to be. It runs cleanly on all modern systems and requires no configuration. The premise is the most original in Spiderweb's catalog. You are a shaper, a member of a powerful cast of mages who can create and modify living creatures, stranded on a quarantined island where an experiment has gone catastrophically wrong. The world you explore is politically alive. Multiple factions with internally consistent ideologies are fighting over what the Shaper's power means, who should have access to it, and whether the created beings deserve rights as full persons. Your choices about which faction to support, which to oppose, and which to quietly betray shape the ending in ways that feel like genuine consequences rather than flavor text. The creature creation system, which lets you build and modify biological followers from basic canines to powerful drakes, is the mechanical engine all of those factions are arguing over. And the game never lets you forget the ethical weight of that. The writing is Vogel at his best, dense with world context, generous with moral ambiguity, and consistent in treating the player as someone capable of handling a genuinely complex argument. The remake restores cut content from the original and rebalances the difficulty. The GOG and Steam releases are the definitive versions. Entomorph is an SSI action RPG set in the world of Aiden, built without the AD&D license the company had leaned on for a decade, and the freedom shows. The premise has no equivalent in the genre. Warwick, a squire searching for his missing sister, arrives on the island of Foros to discover that its noble class has been secretly poisoning the population to transform them into the giant insects that once served as the civilization's labor force. The game's central mechanic flows directly from this. To fight the insect queens, Warwick can consume their nectars, which grant combat enhancements, and accelerate his own transformation. How far you take this is your choice, and the degree of mutation you accumulate shapes the options available at the end. The combat is real-time and deliberately simplified. No weapons or armor, just fist fighting and a small set of spells, with the design clearly prioritizing the exploration and the story over tactical depth. The insect hive environments are among the most visually distinctive levels in any 1995 RPG. A storyteller character narrates key moments in a mode more reminiscent of interactive fiction than conventional RPG delivery, which gives the game an unusual tonal register. Part pulp adventure, part philosophical horror about what a society does to the people it needs to function. The soundtrack is genuinely remarkable for the era. Grungy guitar, jazz, saxophone, and electronic production that has no business being this good in a 1995 PC RPG. The GOG version includes the original and runs clean. Short by the standards of the genre, deliberately so, and built for players willing to engage with its specific strangeness on its own terms. Anvil of Dawn was named Computer Gaming World's best role-playing game of 1995, beating Stonekeep in the same category. A result that surprised the industry at the time, because the game had essentially no marketing budget and Dreamforge Entertainment was known for strategy titles rather than RPGs. What they built was a first-person dungeon crawler with pre-rendered environments, full voice acting, and a character selection system that influences both story encounters and combat tools. 5 heroes are available at the start, and each of the 4 human characters you didn't choose can be met inside the dungeon, their own parallel quests intersecting with yours. The character progression runs entirely through use rather than experience points. Swing a sword to improve with swords. Cast spells to improve spell discipline. The 7 spell schools each develop independently, which means character builds emerge from how you play rather than from a creation screen. Pre-rendered corridor environments were controversial at the time for trading the interactivity of tile-based movement for visual immersion, and the trade-off mostly holds up. The dungeons have genuine environmental variety across their zones. The pacing is well calibrated, and the auto-map that fills in as you explore keeps orientation manageable. The 2013 GOG release runs without configuration on modern systems. The voice acting is of its era, earnest and occasionally overwrought, and the final stretch is harder than what precedes it in ways that don't feel entirely designed. But as a dungeon crawler from a year when the subgenre was producing its last great entries, Anvil of Dawn is one of the strongest. Septerra Core is a Western developer's attempt to make a JRPG, and a successful one, which makes it almost unique in the genre's history. Valkyrie Studios, a Chicago team whose previous credit was a Beavis and Butthead adventure game, build a world of 7-layered continents orbiting a giant biocomputer core inspired by Sumerian mythology with full voice acting, an ATB variant combat system, and an anime-styled visual language. The result is one of the stranger entries in the PC RPG catalog, a game that plays and feels like a PlayStation JRPG but exists only on PC. The world design is the game's strongest achievement. Each of the 7 shells has its own visual identity, culture, and faction, and the game treats cultural coexistence as a genuine theme rather than flavor. Party members from different shells actively conflict with each other, including brawling in battle, with side quests available to improve specific relationships. Maya, the protagonist, is a war orphan whose personal motivation grounds the cosmic conflict in something recognizably human. The combat, which builds charge levels to unlock combo attacks between characters, moves at the ATB pace that PC RPGs of the era typically avoided. The late-game dungeon design is the main point of friction, long stretches of environment with limited save points and encounter density that test patience before the finale. The GOG version includes a modern patch that addresses compatibility and stability. For players who wish the PC RPG genre had made more games that felt like Final Fantasy, Septerra Core is the answer that actually exists. Albion opens on a corporate mining vessel in the year 2227, then immediately crash lands its protagonist into a world that has absolutely nothing to do with corporate mining vessels. A pilot is sent to survey what the company believes is a barren mineral deposit called Nugget. He crash lands instead into Albion, a living, inhabited world of 2 distinct civilizations. A feline humanoid race with a magic system built on plant biology, and the descendants of Earth humans who arrived 2,000 years earlier. The game spends its first half letting you fall in love with this world before pulling the thread that connects it back to the ship waiting in orbit. Blue Byte, a German studio whose main business was the Settlers series, built this as a spiritual successor to the Amber Moon and Amber Star RPGs from the Line Software, and the lineage is visible in the hybrid perspective system. Outdoor exploration uses a top-down overhead view with JRPG-style character sprites. Indoors and in dungeons, the game switches to a fully 3D first-person mode. The combat is turn-based on a chess-like grid where attack positioning and movement order matter beyond just numbers. The keyword dialogue system, which lets you ask NPCs about topics you discovered, rewards curiosity with lore depth that few others bother to build. Albion is worth playing now because of what made it worth playing in 1995, the world. Every zone has its own visual language, culture, and lore. Every town feels like it existed before you arrived. The pacing in the longer dungeon sections can drag, and the late-game grinding is a product of its era. But no other RPG built quite this specific a world, and none of them have since. Nox was made by Westwood Studios after they acquired an orphan project from a developer who had originally conceived it as an action game in the vein of Gauntlet. Westwood turned it into something considerably stranger, an isometric action RPG with 3 completely separate campaigns, depending on which class you pick, each with different missions, different story beats, different NPC relationships, and different endings. Playing all 3 is not the same game repeated. It's 3 distinct readings of the same world through 3 different lenses, with encounters that are friendly to one class and hostile to another. Jack Mower is a regular American who gets pulled through a dimensional wormhole, and the game's comedy comes from treating every fantasy RPG convention through his bewildered suburban eyes. The writing is genuinely funny rather than trying to be. Jack's running commentary on knights, wizards, and prophecy keeps the tone irreverent without undermining the game's actual stakes. The Wizard campaign specifically has a late-game moment with the villain that uses the class's abilities in the narrative payoff in a way that very few games achieve. The line-of-sight system, where visibility works realistically through walls and around corners in real time, creates tactical scenarios that Diablo-style ARPGs typically don't attempt. The OpenNox open-source engine project now provides the best modern way to play, with improved compatibility and modding support. The original version is on GOG and runs fine through DOSBox. Westwood could easily have made a Diablo clone and instead made something genuinely distinct, which is a shame given the studio's subsequent history. The Dark Sun setting is the most distinctive world TSR ever produced, and it has never received an adaptation that matched what it deserved, except possibly this one. No metal weapons, no gods worth praying to, a dying desert world where magic functions by draining life from the land itself, leaving scarred earth behind every casting. A social structure built on slavery and gladiatorial combat. SSI adapted this into a tactical RPG that opens with your party as arena slaves fighting for their lives, and the grimness isn't decorative. It shapes everything the game asks you to do. The combat is fully turn-based on a grid, running the complete AD&D 2nd Edition rule set, including the psionic system that Dark Sun emphasizes over conventional magic. Character creation draws from the setting's unusual race options, whose specific physical capabilities and class restrictions make party composition decisions genuinely meaningful rather than cosmetic. The political structure of the city-states, the economy of scarce resources, and the texture of a civilization built on exploitation all feed into how the game plays rather than just how it looks. The sequel, Wake of the Ravager, extended the campaign. The original is the stronger game in terms of focus. Both are available on GOG. The campaign is shorter and more linear than the setting's potential suggests, and some encounters reflect rushed development rather than intentional difficulty. But no other D&D adaptation let the source material be this specifically itself, and the setting has never been treated this honestly since. Betrayal at Kronder began at Dynamics, a company whose previous work was primarily flight simulators and racing games, and it became Computer Gaming World's role-playing game of 1993. The gap between the pedigree and the output remains one of the more striking things about it. Set in Raymond Feist's Midkemia, it's structured across 9 named chapters like a novel. Third-person narration, a bookmark save system, and writing that treats the player like a reader who deserves a good story rather than a participant collecting fetch quests. The skill system grows through use. Combat competence improves through fighting. Magic improves through casting. There are no level gates between a player and the skills they want. Only time invested and choices made about where to spend it. Mordhell wordlock chests scattered across the world hold unique items and require solving riddles to open, which is as satisfying here as it was 30 years ago because the riddles are genuinely clever rather than arbitrary. The world is open enough that sequence breaking is possible, and the game handles it by having the story adapt rather than lock you out. The pacing deserves criticism. The first-person overworld traversal is slow by any modern standard, and some sequences drag in ways that even the era's tolerance for text-heavy games tested. The CD-ROM release improved the experience considerably. The GOG version is the version to play. For a game that a flight simulator studio made in its first attempt at the genre, Betrayal at Kronder set a bar that most purpose-built RPG developers never cleared. Realms of Arcania Star Trail is built on Das Schwarzauge, Germany's most popular pen-and-paper RPG system, running in Germany the way D&D runs in the English-speaking world. The second game in the trilogy won PC Gamer's Best Role-Playing Game of the Year when it was released. The rule set has a fundamentally different philosophy from D&D. Every attribute cascades through multiple systems in ways that make character creation a series of genuine trade-offs rather than optimization puzzles. A mage who skimps on constitution runs out of stamina mid-dungeon. A warrior who neglects intelligence genuinely struggles with problem-solving encounters. Skills are not additions to a baseline competence. They're the baseline. The isometric tactical combat, the party survival mechanics between dungeons, managing food, disease, camp conditions, and injuries, and a sheer volume of interlocking systems create a game that punishes both carelessness and ignorance in equal measure. The dungeon design is as demanding as anything the era produced, and specific builds are required to access content that the game doesn't announce in advance. Reaching an unwinnable state hours after making a character creation mistake is a real possibility. None of this is accidental. These are the terms of the genre's original contract with the player. The DSA rule set treats the game as an analog for a long tabletop campaign where preparation genuinely matters. The 2013 Steam remake, Realms of Arcania Star Trail Classic, is the version to play now. It runs clean on modern systems and preserves the original design without the interface friction of the DOS version. Darklands is set in the actual Holy Roman Empire of the 15th century, not a fantasy version of medieval Germany, not a Tolkien-adjacent approximation, but the specific historical Germany of 1400s popular belief. Kobolds inhabit the mines. Witches hold black Sabbaths that you can actually infiltrate. The saints of the Catholic Church are invocable in combat, each granting effects tied to their specific medieval attributes. Alchemy functions as a magic system built from real historical theory. The game doesn't adapt history into fantasy. It takes history's own mythology seriously and builds an RPG around it. The classless skill system, real-time with pause combat, and open-world structure arrived 6 years before Baldur's Gate. The game shipped in 1992 in a nearly unplayable state, a catastrophic launch that meant most people who tried it at release bounced off bugs rather than content. Community patches and the GOG release have long since fixed the critical issues, and what's underneath is one of the most genuinely distinctive RPG worlds ever built. Your party ages in real time across the campaign. Reputation varies region by region. Procedural quest generation fills the open world between story events, though that same system produces the repetition that tests patience in longer sessions. The writing is historically known as dense in ways the atmosphere doesn't always match, and the random encounter structure wears thin before the end. These are real limits. What Darklands built, a world where the specific cultural beliefs of 15th century Germans are the game's actual operating mythology, has never been replicated. The GOG version runs cleanly on modern hardware and requires no configuration.